Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cinema Mancuso, and this is Notes on the News. I'm Peter Mancuso, and this is the show where I break down the biggest stories in film, media, and entertainment and give you my thoughts. If you joined us live, super happy to have you. If at any point during the show you have any questions or comments about any of the topics I'm covering, feel free to drop them in the live chat. I'll do my best to keep an eye on it. It's always exciting when people comment. And I had myself playing on my phone so I could read the live chat because it doesn't show up here on my computer for some reason. It's always great when people leave comments because we can kind of get a conversation started. So, please do that. Also, please, if you haven't already, please like this live stream. It really helps with people finding the channel. Also, subscribe if you haven't already. We're really trying to grow the community in a sense. If you're watching this after the fact, still super happy to have you. By the time you're watching this, there should be time codes down below in the description. We stream this every Monday, 6 p.m. Eastern time. And same thing, like I said before, please like this video. It really, really does help. And do not forget to subscribe, or I will come find you. Okay, let's take a look at the box office from this past weekend. Total domestic box office was just under 91 million, which was actually an 11%-ish jump, which is, good to see. Like we've talked about before, this is the part of the year that I think is, in the past has been kind of dubious, right? Once you leave summer and this kind of post-summer box office, pre-award season, it's always usually where it's studios. This in January is where studios just drop the movies that they don't know where else to put them, right? But even once we move into award season, awards movies aren't really bringing in a huge amount of money, right? And I was looking at the upcoming slate for like wide releases from now until the end of the year, and there's obviously like a couple big things, but nothing really jumps out at me as being anything that's gonna, unseat or dethrone the likes of something like Inside Out 2. Maybe like a Moana 2 because the first one was so popular, but I have a feeling that movie's going to kind of fall flat critically, and it will do commercially well, but not to the point where it's going to be in the conversation of being the highest grossing movie of the year, right? So my point with all of this is that this is like a pretty decent September weekend return, right? So the number one movie of the weekend, in its first weekend, The Wild Robot. It coming in at first place in its first weekend, brought in about $35 million, which fell right into those projections on the upper end of between 30 and 37 million. Actually had the best per theater average of the weekend at around just under $9,000 per theater. And this one's going to be interesting to watch as we go forward, right? So worldwide, it's grossed a little over 53 million, but it was made for 78, right? So as of right now, it's in the red. If you look all the way over to that rightward column, it's in the red. But here's what I'm hearing. Here's what the news is, or here's the word, that this is going to be a movie that has legs. Or at least that's the hope. That seems to be the strategy that DreamWorks is taking with this film. A lot of people have been comparing it, not in terms of the film's contents by any means, but just in terms of a potential box office strategy, to something like Elemental, right? The Pixar movie that came out last year, that did not open very well. In fact, it opened very poorly. While it did not become a mammoth financial success, kept making a decent amount of money every weekend, right? It seems to be, at least the hope, is that The Wild Robot is going to do something similar. And I know a lot of people are hoping for that because the reviews have just been outstanding, that this is like one of the best films of the year, if not one of the best animated films of the decade. I'm going to actually see it this week, I think on Thursday. So, by this time next week, I'll be able to report if it's worth the critical acclaim, but, that seems to be the strategy here for The Wild Robot. But, strategies fall apart all the time. Again, it is still in that red zone. So, it'll be a really big test to see what's that worldwide total like next weekend. Also opening, we have a Indian film, Devara Part 1. Again, this was not on my radar. I really don't know much about this. Open to about 5.6 million. It's made around about 33 million worldwide, but off of a $36-ish million budget. So that's also still in the red. This has obviously been out presumably in Indian cinemas for quite some time at this point, but it still has a little bit of a ways to go to be profitable. And we've been seeing a lot of this past, ever since I started the show, we've been seeing Bollywood films crack the top 10. In this case, again, it's the top 5. So it's something I talk about all the time. It really speaks to the industry, just kind of the offerings that moviegoers have for this random movie that no one's ever heard of to make it to number 4 in the top 10. In the United States is, I think, a big feat, even if it's not making a lot of money, nor is it close to making back its budget. Also opening this weekend, the highly controversial Megalopolis, the Francis Ford Coppola epic, decades in the making. This is a disaster is the wrong word, right? So I have not seen this. I don't plan on seeing it just because I'm so busy. It has not been getting very good reviews. It was not getting good reviews from the moment it, premiered at the festivals this past year. And the reviews have just gotten worse. And on Letterboxd, I think it's like a 2.6 or something. It is not going well for this film. But, it's okay as long as it makes back some of its money, right? Well, that seems very unlikely here. So it opened at $4 million, which fell just below my projections of around 5 to 8 million. So 5 to 8 was already going to be a disaster. And it couldn't even, at a certain point, if it had made 5 or 6, would it be that much better for Megalopolis? No. But it just adds insult to injury when it couldn't even meet those pathetic projections, right? And not only is that not a lot of money in general, considering how much it was made for, this is easily a bomb, right? You got your flops. This is a bomb. It was made for $120 million. So it's a negative 97% return, negative. But obviously, I don't know who thought this was going to be a big moneymaker. Francis Ford Coppola basically financed this film, not completely himself, but a huge portion of that $120 million budget just came from his own personal coffers, in a sense. And he's made very clear, because this guy's old, right? It's not like he's clamoring to become a gajillionaire, because he already is a gajillionaire, right? So for him, it was about realizing this vision. And from what I've heard from people who've seen it, it's a vision, right? For better or for worse, it is Francis Ford Coppola's unadulterated vision. Now, if he can live with the fact that his unadulterated vision has been essentially rejected critically and commercially by the educated critical class as well as moviegoers, because usually when you have an artsy film, it may not make a lot of money, but the critics love it, or vice versa. The critics hate it, but it makes a lot of money. When you have neither group on your side, that probably stings the ego. But, the man has made some of the greatest films ever made, so I'm sure he's going to be able to sleep at night. Though I would imagine this will be his last film, because he hasn't really made that many films in, the past 20 years. So I would be shocked if he makes another film after this, even if this did really well. Just because he's old, right? And he just isn't as active and prolific as he once was. But especially with the disaster that I feel comfortable calling it that, a disaster. This is probably going to be his last film, for better or for worse. Also, not quite opening this week, but we have going wide, is My Old Ass, the indie film about a girl who takes some shrooms and encounters her future self, who gives her advice. And it has been actually in theater. This is actually its third weekend, but it actually jumped from 19th to 8th place because it went wide, right? So as you see over in the middle part of the chart there, it has a 700 and plus % increase. That's because they added, over 1,300 theaters, right? This was only in maybe a couple dozen theaters. So I'm happy it was able to get into the top 10. I actually saw it. My review for it is going to be coming out tomorrow on cinemaincuso.substack.com, where I publish written reviews for new movies coming out. I thought it was great. It's definitely not. It's apparent to me that it's not going to get a lot of award buzz just because it's just too small in a lot of ways. But it's a shame because I think it's easily one of my favorite films of the year. Highly recommend it if you can catch it. If you're near one of these 1,390 theaters, I definitely recommend you go see it. And this brings its worldwide total just under 3. So most of its money is being made domestically, right? Let's see here. And let's talk about some stuff continuing this weekend. We have Transformers 1. Dropping from second to third in its second weekend, bringing in about 9.3 million. But take a look at that percent drop, a 62% drop. So this is the canary in the coal mine for the Wild Robot. I had said last week when Transformers 1 opened and it fell below projections, that I'm sure the people at DreamWorks are a little worried about the Wild Robot opening. The Wild Robot needs to avoid what is happening in Transformers 1. Because Transformers 1 also has really good reviews. Not nearly as good. No one's claiming it's like one of the best films of the decade, but it's still decent reviews. It did not open, it did not meet its projections. It has now had basically a 2/3 drop. It only dropped 8 theaters, so it's not like it had this huge exodus of screenings. So this is a little disappointing if you are Paramount or you're a fan of Transformers and you really liked this film. I went to go see it. My review for that's also coming out tomorrow, and I thought it was fine. It was way better than the trailers made it seem, but it still felt a little not ready for prime time, in a sense. It felt kind of... juvenile's the wrong word, because it's not that it's crude or immature, but just juvenile, like it feels like a 13-year-old wrote it. A really talented 13-year-old, but a 13-year-old, right? Lots of overused cliche lines and plot beats and all this stuff. So it kind of felt like the quality, at least of the writing, felt like a Saturday morning cartoon in a bad way. So I guess this drop is reflecting maybe people are feeling the same way, right? This brings its domestic total to just over 39 million, and its worldwide total to about 72. But again, off of like $111 million budget. So it's still in the red. So if you're seeing it here, most of these movies are in the red. So that's a little disappointing, especially if you're Paramount and you put all this money into this franchise that's theoretically, it's supposed to be like one of your, like tent poles, right? Because if you think about like what franchises does Paramount really have? They have Top Gun, Mission Impossible, and I would argue Transformers, right? That's been a huge one over the past, at least when I was growing up with like the Shia LaBeouf, Michael Bay movies, which I actually quite like, at least the first one. Maybe it's just nostalgia. Let's see what else. Continuing this weekend, we also had the Halle Berry horror thriller Never Let Go. Big drop. It only dropped 51% in terms of like the money that it made, but it dropped in terms of its placement. So it dropped from 4th to 9th, only bringing in about 2.2 million. Had the worst per theater average of the weekend at $825. This brings its domestic total, what is it now? A little over 8, and worldwide is about the same. So, and again, this was off of like a $20 million budget. So this was not a particularly expensive film, but it's still in the red, right? So many of these movies are still in the red, and they gotta get it together. Also continuing, we have The Substance, that kind of indie psycho thriller about beauty standards for women, and I've also heard very, very good things. I'm really excited for this upcoming award season, because I'm always presented with movies that I never heard of, and then they become some of my favorite films of the year, if not of all time, right? So this, I'm hoping, is going to be one of them. I'm going to see it this week. Dropped from 6th to 10th place, though. But again, a film like this, the fact that it even made it into the top 10, I think deserves a little, round of applause. Made about 1.8 million for the weekend. Domestic total is now around just under 7 million, and worldwide total about 10. But again, it was made for like 17.5. So again, still in the red. Hopefully this can kind of have some legs and just kind of keep going during award season, especially if it starts getting some awards buzz. Otherwise, but again, movies like this, they're not necessarily, designed to be huge money makers. But it definitely is helpful when they at least make back their budget, because then it incentivizes, studios to make more of these. Also still in the top 5, we have Beetlejuice. Beetlejuice finally dropping from its first place spot in its 4th weekend down to 2nd place. Brought in just about 16 million for the weekend. Let's see here. Domestic total is about 250, and worldwide about 373. Again, just off of a $100 million budget. So this has been a decent little success, right? Again, not an overwhelming success, but a nice little treat for Warner Brothers. And Warner Brothers had a pretty good year, right? Because they had Dune, which was the highest grossing film of the year until Inside Out 2, and then Deadpool and Wolverine. I believe they're also behind the Godzilla and Kong movie, which was also like one of the bigger moneymakers for part of the year. So, Warner Brothers, so this is like a little extra little feather in its cap. Again, a film that I did not think was going to do particularly well because I didn't have faith in the Beetlejuice brand, the Beetlejuice branding. So that's definitely notable here. Still in the top 5 after about a month. And then we also have Speak No Evil, a movie that I hope I never have to see because at least the trailer made it seem really uncomfortable. It dropped from 3rd to 5th place in its 3rd frame. Made just a little over $4 million for the weekend. This brings its domestic total to 28, worldwide to about 58, off of just a $15 million budget. So again, this is one of those that's having some legs. It's even though the trailer seemed really uncomfortable, I guess it had a lot of because it was so oversaturated with marketing, I think that helps, right? Even if the trailers, I found them very uncomfortable. So clearly that's working for that. And again, still in the top 5. So, when this movie first opened, my kind of headline for it was that this had kind of flopped. And someone commented, like, this movie has been a success by every measure. And I was like, not really. But I will admit when I'm wrong, and it is proving to have a little bit more staying power, particularly because of the worldwide market. Interestingly, because considering that this is actually an English language remake of, I think, a Danish film. So the fact that it's playing really well outside of the United States, even though they already have their own version of this, is interesting. Also, just one last note here. Deadpool and Wolverine, still in the top 10. 10 weeks now, 10 weekends, dropped from just 5th to 7th. Again, like I've been saying a million times, at this point, it's just about any little extra cheddar. It brought in about $2.7 million, about 30% drop. And domestic total is about $631 million, worldwide total $1.321 billion with a B, off of just a $200 million budget. So this is definitely not only one of the highest grossing films, but definitely one of the more successful ones in terms of that percent return. Got some comments here. Spencer Twitty, hello Spencer, happy to have you again this week, wrote, I saw The Wild Robot in IMAX. Every frame is a beautiful painting. The jokes were decent, but the plot was mundane. Basically, if Puss 2 and Migration had a baby. Interesting. 2 films that I didn't think could ever be like combined. So that's a really interesting read on it. I'm interested to see if I agree or if I have a different take once I go see it. But it's interesting you're bringing up this idea that script-wise, it's like nothing spectacular, but like the animation is just so stunning. And that's what's been really cool about like the past, I would say 10 or even maybe just 5 years, has been the Hollywood animation industry is starting to realize, because there was this huge push for years, how realistic can we make CG animation? And that seemed to be the thing to set it apart from 2D animation. And I think eventually the industry realized animation is valuable because it's not realistic, right? So how can we take advantage? How can we make 3D animated films feel as artistic as 2D ones? So you've been getting lots of more experiment. I mean, Spider-Verse is always the one people point to, but that's kind of like the poster child. But there's been so many films that have really stretched, our conceptions of what a 3D animated film looks like. Having a lot more like intentional art styles that are going to kind of future-proof those films. Because you watch some movies, it's very prevalent like in games, right? That there's a lot of games that if they're trying to be super, super realistic looking, like photorealistic, 10 years later, they're going to look like shit, right? But if you have something that is more cartoony, or at least more stylized, style and art design hold up, right? And I think the same is true for movies. So maybe kind of tying this back into the box office here, maybe that will get people to go see it, but that could also hurt it, right? If the script isn't good, most viewers are not in tune with like the formal elements of cinema, so they might just kind of walk away from it not being super jazzed about the script elements, like the textual elements. So I don't know, but that's an interesting evaluation. I'm excited to go see it this I think Thursday, I said. Hold on, I'm sorry. Okay, and then we also have upcoming this weekend, Joker Folie à Deux. I did not like the first one. And from my understanding, this one is not very good. So I will tell you now, I will not be going to see this just until I get more subscribers and I can make money off of this. I can quit my job, my full-time job. Until then, I don't have enough time to go see every single movie. So if a movie I know is not going to be very good, or at least statistically speaking, enough people have sampled and said that it's not going to be great. It's not. I just don't have the time for it. But right now, it's projected to make about anywhere from 61 to 75 million, though it seems like the projections are getting smaller and smaller every week. So I would not be surprised if this falls below projections, or if it does make it in, it'll be like in like the mid 60s range. Again, because I don't think the word of mouth has been very good, and I think people, really, a lot of people really liked the first one, but I think this one is just, I gotta give them credit for doing such a big swing and doing something completely kind of different is the wrong word, but kind of something you wouldn't expect. But it'll be interesting to see where the pieces fall, because of course that was a very, very financially successful first film. And then we also have White Bird, a wonder story. So here's the story with this one. The story with this movie is, and also Spencer, I see you commented about Joe. I'll circle back in a second. But so if you've seen, so there's a movie called Wonder that came out, I think it was 2017. It's based off of a book. I think it's based off a real kid. And it is about this kid who has like all these like facial, like birth defects and facial kind of deformities or whatever. And he's played by Jacob Tremblay, and it's cute. It's kind of a family dramedy, and it's by him at school learning to be accepted by by fellow students, whatever, right, all this stuff. And it was a kind of a sweet film. It was directed by the guy who did Perks of Being a Wallflower. So it was like a lot better than you would think it would be based off of like that Hallmark movie logline. But then they decided to make this sequel called, following the stupid franchise name nomenclature of A Blank Story, started by Star Wars, calling things a Star Wars story, and I think now there's like a John Wick story spinoff. White Bird, a Wonder Story, is about the bully from that movie. He gets expelled, right? And he goes to live with his grandmother, played by Helen Mirren, in England, I think. And she's like, "You bullied that boy. Let me tell you a story about bullies. The Nazis." And the whole movie is an extended flashback. So this girl in the picture here is supposed to be young Helen Mirren. And it's like this like World War II Nazi drama thing. It's so bizarre. And what makes it more bizarre is that I remember, so I've been doing movie reviews for about 2 years, and this was going to be one of the first things I did back in 2022, and then it got delayed. And then it got delayed again. And it's been on my calendar and then gets deleted like 4 or 5 times. So I'm still not convinced this is coming out until I actually see box office numbers coming in for this movie. But it's not projected to make a lot, only about 3 to 6 million, which, what do you expect? It feels like a direct-to-streaming sequel. Just to briefly touch on your point. So Spencer asked in the comments, what didn't I like about the first Joker movie? So this is actually a great little way for me to self-promote. So some of you may know, I have me and my fiance Viviana, we have a podcast called Now That's What I Call a Franchise, where we pick a film franchise and go through every single film in the franchise. And we did Batman, right? So we have an episode on Joker. So if you want to get a full understanding of my thoughts, of which I have many, you can find, anyone interested can find the link in the description below to the podcast. You can find our episode. But briefly, I just think it's like too pleased with itself. It thinks it's way smarter and innovative than it really is. And also it just fundamentally doesn't understand the Joker. I think, to sum it up, I think something I said on the podcast was like, the thing about the Joker is that, the thing about this version of the Joker is that his whole character arc is like, he kills to find meaning, right? Like his whole, like for him, killing is a way for him to like assert dominance in his own and control over his own life, right? So for him, killing imbues meaning. But that's not really true to the Joker in the comics, because for the Joker in the comics, murder and death have no meaning. Like life has no meaning, right? That's the whole point. So you have this disconnect between a character who kills because it gives him meaning, and then you have the origin of the character where the whole point is that he kills because life has no meaning. So that's like one of several examples that I think it kind of falls apart. But even if that was there, even if that was, you know, still there, it could have been a better movie if it was just like better made. But the movie is like so pleased with itself, like that it's much better than it really is. But again, I don't want to belabor it too much. This is supposed to be the box office section, so if you want to hear more of my thoughts about that, you can listen to the podcast. Because we talked about it for like 2 hours, 2.5 hours. So you know, if you can't get enough Peter, then you can you know, the podcast is there to fulfill all your sick, twisted needs. Okay, let me grab a quick drink here. Okay, so let's talk about story number 1. So Chappell Roan, pop sensation, has canceled her appearances at the All Things Go music festival in New York City and Baltimore. She's citing her health as, she's citing her health and the quote unquote overwhelming past few weeks. And I'm not doing that sarcastically. I'm just quoting her. And I have a further quote from her here saying, quote, "I am really feeling it. I feel pressures to prioritize a lot of things right now, and I need a few days to prioritize my health. I want to be present when I perform and give the best shows possible. Thank you for understanding. Be back soon," end quote. And similarly, the festival, All Things Go, the festival that she is canceling from, also support Roan in a similarly timed statement where they said, quote, "All Things Go strongly supports artists prioritizing their well-being, and we ask our community to rally around Chappell Roan with love and understanding. Let's continue to show the world that music fans support not just the art, but the artists themselves," end quote. So it's at least good when you're bailing on on an event, they're kind of have your back there, right? So when I decided to do this story, I have to take a step back. Some of you may have no idea who Chappell Roan is. So, who is Chappell Roan? So, Kaylee Rose Amstutz, or AKA Chappell Roan, is the 26-year-old pop singer, songwriter sensation. Her kind of background is she had posted, you know, she's been a singer-songwriter since she was like a teenager, and she posted an original song on YouTube about a decade ago when she was like 17. She was then signed to Atlantic Records, but then she was dropped in 2020. And from my understanding, according to her Wikipedia bio, she took a short break and then began working again in 2022. And this all kind of led up to the release of her album, The Rise and Fall of a Midwest Princess. And that was released in 2023. At the time, it was received well by critics, but it kind of went under the radar. But then it kind of slowly but surely developed this cult following, and it really blew up in early 2024. It helped that Chappell Roan was a supporting act on Olivia Rodrigo's tour around that time. And a lot of singles from the album have become huge hits, right? So Hot to Go is, I mean, I had never heard Chappell Roan. I had heard of her on Twitter, but I never listened to any of her music. And funny enough, the first time I heard Hot to Go was at a Mets game because they were playing it, because it was like Pride night, because it was like late June. So of course you gotta play some Chappell Roan on Pride night. And it's arguably the song of the summer. It's a great song. I love Hot to Go, and I like quite a bit of her music. And The Guardian notes she currently has, you know, she's not just some kind of like indie internet thing. She has 7 songs currently in the Billboard Top 100. So she's a major figure in the music industry now, which is really weird because she essentially went from a relative unknown to one of the biggest names in pop music, or just music in general. And not only, you know, the shift to fame is always going to come with growing pains, but the fact of how quick this was exasperates that. So she has publicly called out fans for weird behavior. This idea that we forget celebrities are also people. And this isn't what she's necessarily talking about, but I always feel weird. Like because I live in New York and I've passed celebrities on the street all the time. More so when I was in college because I was living in Manhattan. But I typically don't just go up to them because, like, they're also people. Like, how would you feel if people were just, like, bombarding you all the time. Like, you feel like you're like a Disneyland character walking around, like you're a human being. So she put out this quote. I have a quote from her here saying, quote, "I don't care that this crazy type of behavior comes along with the job, the career field I've chosen. That does not make it okay. That doesn't make it normal. That doesn't mean that I want it. That doesn't mean that I like it," end quote. So talking about kind of weird parasocial line crossing behavior from some fans that she's encountered. And I think she's 100% right. I think a lot of times people kind of brush off celebrity, complaints like this, being like, well, yeah, but you're making millions of dollars, so it kind of comes with the territory. No, people shouldn't feel uncomfortable or feel like they're being taken advantage of, right? It also raises these interesting questions about the idea of the overnight success, because usually whenever the media calls someone an overnight success, it's oftentimes people that have been working tirelessly for years who suddenly find success, right? But they're not quite an overnight success. And that's true with Chappell Roan. Again, she's been more or less at this for almost a decade, since she was a teenager, right? And she spoke to Rolling Stone saying, quote, "I would not have been able to handle any of this even a year ago today. It would have just been too much," end quote. And the reason why I'm talking about this is because of there's for two reasons. And the first one I'm going to talk about is this idea of mental health, right? And again, mental health issues don't suddenly go away because you're famous and you have millions of dollars now, right? This is something that everybody struggles with. But fame compounds the problems. And it doubly compounds, or not times two, but to the second power, like exponential. It's even worse for young women, right? Because of body image standards, and also just the media likes to hate on women sometimes, or roots for their downfall, or what have you. So, this has been a really, just all the info I've laid out. If this were you're a 26-year-old woman who suddenly is now one of the most famous people in music, that is a huge shift, right? That's a huge shift in the way you live your life and the way you see your life. So again, celebrities need the space to process their emotions, right? In a healthy way. I have a quote from her here saying, quote, "My brain is like, quit right now, take next year off. This industry and artistry fucking thrive on mental illness, burnout, overworking yourself, overextending yourself, not sleeping. You get bigger the more unhealthy you are. Isn't that so fucked up? The ambition is, how do I not hate myself, my job, my life, and do this? Because right now it's not working. I'm just scrambling to try to feel healthy." Very forthright, right? And I think a lot of people, again, instantly become defensive because when normal people hear this, we have this sense of like, oh, like, poor you, because again, you're famous and you're highly you're fulfilling your artistic ambitions and you're making a lot of money doing it. So I think sometimes we have this gut instinct to kind of react aggressively against people when they make these kinds of comments. But again, Chappell Roan is a human being, and she's admitted she's been diagnosed with severe depression, bipolar 2 disorder. If you're not familiar with bipolar, there's like two versions of it, and the one she has, it's less manic, more depressive, right? And again, she's been very forthright about all this. And The Guardian notes that she said to an audience back in June, quote, "I just want to be honest with the crowd. I just feel a little off today because I think that my career is just kind of going really fast. It's really hard to keep up. I'm just being honest that I'm just having a hard time today," end quote. That's kind of weird if you're in the audience, but that's really brave, I think, for her to say that in front of thousands of people who are there to see her be all happy and go lucky, right? So this has been a problem for a couple of weeks or months anyway. But most recently, and this is why I'm talking about this today, most recently she's come under fire for comments on the upcoming election. So people wanted her to endorse Kamala Harris, and she said she didn't support Kamala. So, people who are, full-fledged Kamala, I guess you call them Kamala stans, or at least just people kind of like firmly entrenched in the establishment Democratic Party, took that to mean, well, that must mean she's supporting Trump, right? And some people have noted, because her uncle is a Republican member of the Missouri House of Representatives. As if that matters, right? I mean, like, everybody has a Republican uncle, right? That I feel like that's irrelevant. So she later then made a video clarifying, like, no, she's not going to vote for Trump. She's going to vote for Kamala, but that doesn't mean she's going to endorse her. And I have this she made this TikTok, and this is on the left here, you can see this, this picture of her from the TikTok. This isn't a full this isn't a full transcript of the whole thing, but I just like to read this little bit that she talks about here, because I think it's really interesting. She says, quote, "I don't agree with a lot of what's going on with policies. Honestly, fuck the policies of the right, but also fuck some of the policies on the left." Also, sidebar, I really like how in the video she says this, because she's like, fuck some policies on the left. But it's so true, though. But anyway, so fuck the policy on the right, but also fuck some of the policies on the left. That's why I can't endorse. That's why I can't put my entire name, my entire project behind one. There is no way I can stand behind some of the left's completely transphobic and completely genocidal views. So yeah, there are huge problems on both. You know what is right and wrong, and so do I. Fuck Trump for fucking real, but fuck some of the shit that has gone down in the Democratic Party that has failed people like me and you. And more so Palestine, and more so every marginalized community in the world. So no, I'm not going to settle for the options that are in front of me, and you're not going to make me feel bad for that, end quote. So again, really brave stuff, right? You know, again, and I'm going to say this multiple times, this is a 26-year-old young woman. Like, I'm 27, like, she's younger than I am. So the fact that she's being put in these positions where she has to weigh in on these things, you know, I give her credit for, you know, kind of at least being brave enough to stand up for what she thinks, right? Of course, liberals took this to mean that she was equivocating, right? That, you know, oh, well, because when people usually say there's problems on both sides, usually it's from this kind of milquetoast centrist point of view of like, well, they're both bad, but it's kind of hard to. You can't really morally equivocate, you know, like white supremacy and like people just wanting, you know, trans rights, right? People are like, oh, they're both extreme. I have a comment here from Casa21. I think she slipped up and said the left when she meant the Democratic Party. 100%. So that was gonna be my next point. Is that clearly when she says the left, she's really talking about the centrist Democratic Party establishment, right? Because true leftism is against transphobia and the genocide happening in Gaza, right? So really, really great point, Kesa. Viviana also writes, she's just a gal who likes to dance with her grandparents. Let her live freely. 100%, right? I feel like that viral video from like early YouTube days of the person going, leave Brittany alone. And that's how I feel. Leave Chappell alone. Leave this poor girl alone. And the reason why this is happening speaks to a larger problem in politics, that this is a natural problem that arises when you have a firmly entrenched two-party system, that it becomes almost like a sporting event, because of course in a sporting event, there's not multiple people, it's 1v1, right? There's only two people, or two teams or sides, right? So this idea in American politics, which is really dumb, is that if you hate one side, that means you're kind of forced to contort and support this other side blindly, even if they don't fully represent you. And partisans take advantage of this. And when I say partisans, I mean both people who work within the political apparatus, but also, you know, the pundits, right? The people who are very much like they exist to kind of be boosters for the Democrats or the Republicans, right? So partisans will do this to guilt you into it. So if you think Kamala Harris isn't doing enough to advocate for the queer community, or you are against her support of Israel and their war in Gaza, you know, does that mean you support Trump? This idea of criticizing Kamala somehow meaning that you then therefore support Trump only comes from a firmly entrenched two-party system where if you don't like one, that means you have to support the other. And again, most of the people that were criticizing her and dunking on Chappell Roan and making like TikTok stitches of like them responding and making fun of her are mostly affluent white liberals, right? And again, liberal, the right has made the word liberal mean like a radical communist or something. Liberal, if anything, liberal just means like a centrist, just like a neoliberal kind of your run-of-the-mill Democrat. And this raises interesting questions. What role should celebrities play in elections when it comes to their endorsements? So again, I made a whole video about Taylor Swift endorsing Kamala. I talked about why that was really important for the election, right? Because they can be hugely beneficial for a candidate, right? That's why partisans do that guilt game, because they want to get the people with the platform to endorse their candidate, right? And I firmly believe those with a large platform, if you're a celebrity, you have a responsibility to use it. But that I think that means that you should therefore use it to speak out against injustice. That doesn't necessarily mean supporting a specific candidate. So, frankly, I don't think any celebrity needs to endorse anybody. I think celebrities should speak out against bad things happening, but I think that's kind of irrelevant to a specific candidate. Casa21, I hope I'm saying that right. Casa21 also comments, no matter what she does, people freak out. First, she wasn't speaking up enough, and then she didn't say enough or equivocated too much. Then she clarified in a way that people also didn't like. She can't win. 100%. Again, this would happen no matter who it was saying this, again, because of like the political kind of the way the status quo is set up. But again, it doesn't help that she's a young woman. Right, that makes it even worse, or it makes it harder for her to quote unquote win, because people are always going to have this reflexive, defensive posture when someone like her is going to say something. So if you take anything from this, go vote. Right, I'm going to start trying to do this in the weeks leading up to the election. Everyone should go vote. Vote your conscience. I firmly believe in third parties. I know the idea is that, voting isn't about picking the person you think is going to win. Voting is about picking the person that most aligns with your views. In a third party candidate, just the way the Electoral College is set up, cannot and will not win. But the whole idea of a third party is that the two major parties will adopt some of the third party's platform, right? But they'll only do that if they feel like those platform positions are popular. So a third-party candidate while not winning, if they get enough people to vote for them, the major parties will look and go, well, how can we get those thousands of people to come to us? And that's the whole point of a democratic, representative democracy. The idea is that we don't want politicians voting their conscience. We want them to do what we want them to do. That's like the whole point, right? So, go vote. If you haven't registered, go do that, because the election's in like 5 or 6 weeks. And all this to say, people were mad at her for pulling out of the festivals, like people who didn't care about this whole political backlash. But now they're mad because like they were excited to see her at these festivals. I would say blame the assholes online, not her, because ultimately she has to prioritize her health. Viviana also notes here, I think it's silly for people to be mad at Chappell for not following Taylor, because they play two very different roles in pop culture, and classic Dems aren't a part of it. 100%. Taylor Swift, while having signaled she's very progressive, she still gets some flack for kind of epitomizing white feminism. Not that, because obviously Chappell Roan is also a white woman, but Taylor Swift is a lot more palatable. It's no accident that Chappell Roan has really been, the queer community has really latched onto her, because she herself, I believe, is gay or bi. I actually don't really know, but a whole part of her aesthetic is pulling from like drag queens and pulling from like queer history. So it's a very different thing. And so for Taylor Swift to make some kind of endorsement is, as I talked about in my video, which you should all go watch, that's hugely influential. Chappell Roan, I mean, if anything, she should just be getting people to go register to vote. But I'm not sure if she really needs to be endorsing anybody. I'm not saying that she's not allowed to or she shouldn't, but she shouldn't have to, is my point. I think she should use her platform to speak out for the marginalized, but politicians are not the marginalized. So it's like, sorry, Kamala, if you really wanted Chappell Roan, you should amend your policies. I don't know what to tell you. You make certain choices, right? If you want certain people's endorsements, so you have certain positions. So if you change your policies to appease Chappell Roan, you might lose those people over here. So you just have to make the choice. But then at the same time, you can get mad at her for, speaking her truth. Okay, let me grab a quick drink here. I'm loving these comments. Again, it really helps me because it feels like I'm not just talking in an echo chamber. So if you guys have more thoughts as we go along, feel free to drop them, even if it's not a question, or I just like to read them out loud just so other people can hear them in case they're not looking at the chat. So let's talk about story number 2 here. So the New York Times has announced that it will launch subscriptions to its backlog of podcasts on Apple and Spotify. So the most recent episodes of any of their podcast shows will remain free, right? So, if you listen to it early enough, you're not going to have to pay anything. But eventually, you'll enter the backlog, and you'll have to pay a monthly or yearly subscription for that. The Hollywood Reporter notes that subscribers will get, not only will they be able to access the old shows, but they'll be able to get early access to certain shows that maybe, like a couple days before. I got a quote here from Ben Cotton, who's the head of subscription products for the New York Times. Here's their kind of explanation for this strategy. Quote, "We have a slate of really outstanding shows, and we have built out dedicated places for people who want to listen to them on our own platforms, either in our core news app or in our audio app. But we have millions of listeners who are listening to our shows exclusively on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. So we see it as kind of a natural next step to extend our business from an audio standpoint to bring it directly to where listeners are listening to our shows on these platforms. We think our audio journalism is worth paying for, just the same as everything else that our newsroom produces every day. And we want to sort of take a next step in that journey from a business standpoint," end quote. And that's a really interesting point, what he says here about, where does he say? "We think our audio journalism is worth paying for, just the same as everything else," right? This idea, and I always thought it was weird that, us as the consumers are getting all this free journalism through their podcasts that you kind of don't even need a New York Times subscription. And I don't have one. My mother has one, so I mooch off of her. And that's where I source, not all the stories, but it's good to have, articles about these topics from the New York Times. Because obviously it's the New York Times. But I think that kind of makes sense, if in a way, right? So the pricing structure is going to be either $6 a month, or if you do it yearly, it'll be $50 a year. Now, notably, you'll have full access if you already have a New York Times subscription. So if you're already paying for New York Times, you're not going to have to pay an additional thing on top of this, though they may eventually raise their rates because they're going to include more stuff. But at least as of right now, it's not like you have to also do this. Notably, though, there's no mention of other podcast platforms, right? So, for example, I don't use either Spotify or Apple for podcasting. I use Apple for music. But I actually use a platform, Pocket Casts, because I like the way you can create different filters. So that way I'm able to filter different kinds of shows. And because there's certain shows that are daily, and it's kind of like if I don't listen to it within like a day, it's kind of like old news at that point. And then there's other shows that it's like, if I listen to it within a week, it's okay. And then there's some shows where it's like, I'm going back a decade, right? It's like, it's not really time pertinent. So I'm wondering, am I still just be able to get everything for free on Pocket Casts, or will they just not be available on Pocket Casts anymore, or whatever your preferred podcasting platform is? So the reason why this story intrigued me is because podcasts have really blown up over the past decade, because I remember in the 2000s, like especially the late 2000s, it was kind of niche, right? Podcasts were kind of this more niche thing. But figures like Joe Rogan at Spotify have obviously had a huge influence. Not just him, there's obviously a bunch of other huge podcasters, but he really is the one that I think helped make it such a big business that, like, okay, real money is now getting involved, right? And New York Times has really, particularly the New York Times has really focused on growing their podcast library. And they have a lot of really popular shows. So, of course, they have Serial, which is like that, exactly what it sounds like. It's about, I guess, like serial killer cases or whatever. They also have The Daily, which is a daily show that they do, hence the name. I also really love the Ezra Klein show, and that's who's pictured here. He's a columnist, opinion writer and editor at the New York Times. He has his talk show. He brings on different people. Really just insightful, smart guy, right? It's great because it's free, or at least it was free. Or at least, I guess it will be free as long as you listen to it within a week, right? And again, like I was saying, the podcasting is a wonderful complement, if not for some people a full-on substitute for the written journalism. Because, it gives people the chance to be informed, even if they don't have the time to read, right? Because it's easier. You might have time to listen to something while you're on the subway or you're driving, or maybe while you're working at work, you can listen, as opposed to like taking the time to read an article. It's not because people are dumb or lazy. It's just sometimes because of the nature of capitalism, we don't always have time. So we have to kind of multitask. So the idea here, at least the business strategy, is that this will hopefully allow a positive feedback loop that reinforces their podcasting ambitions. So got a quote here from Paula Schuchman. I don't know how to pronounce this. Szüchman. I'm gonna say Schuckman. Sorry. Paula, who's the Times, New York Times director of audio, says, "Quote: The goal is that it gives us more opportunities to invest in more journalism and more shows and podcasts. So that's all for the good. Our strategy is going to continue to tap into Times journalism. Our strategy is the more the subscription model works, the more we can invest in growing the portfolios." End quote. So the idea, I guess, is more money for the podcast means they have more money to invest into the podcast, which will get more people subscribed, which will hopefully become this kind of snowball effect, right? I got some comments here. Keza21 said, "Not happy about it, but my understanding is that they get most of their revenue from sources other than the reporting, like New York Times games, etc. So I get it." So that was gonna be another thing. Is journalism needs all the help it can get, right? Because the profit motive of capitalism and the integrity ambitions of journalists and journalism don't always align. They don't always contradict one another, but they don't always align, and then it creates tensions of, well, if push comes to shove, which are we going to prioritize, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that this leads to fake stories or lying stories, but it could just shift your business strategy, and it leads to a prioritization of certain stories or certain ways to frame a story, right? So the biggest example of this is just cable news, right? Which is firmly, held by the balls of needing to make as much money as possible, right? So cable news compared to written news is way more about spectacle and way more about entertainment, right? So what's the solution for this, right? So we've had billionaires buying news outlets, like what Jeff Bezos bought the Washington Post, which theoretically, okay, that's good because then it's, that's a huge influx of cash, but then it could potentially become a conflict of interest, right? If you have an op-ed writer, maybe they won't be as aggressive about criticizing Amazon or Jeff Bezos, right? So that's, possible solution, but it's not an ideal solution. So the best scenario is when the journalism is subsidized by other offerings, right? So like Keza21 said. So puzzles, recipes, and then podcasts had always kind of blurred the line, right? Because they're journalistic, but they would have sponsorships usually at the beginning or the middle or the end. And now there's going to be paywalls. And again, the revenue from these ventures, as well as the subscription for the actual written journalism, it helps kind of subsidize the journalism is like a public good, right? And it needs to be subsidized by all of these very superficial products, because in a perfect world, journalism is not a product. So while I'm always, displeased, kind of like Keza said, while I'm always displeased that something that was once free is now going to be behind a paywall, in the long term, if it's going to help maintain journalism, then I'm cautiously for it. Viviana writes here, "I find it interesting that it's for the archive and not the newer episodes." Interesting, yeah, because you could do it where it's like only the new stuff you have to pay for, but then once it's old enough, you can go back. I would imagine the idea is because they do have those sponsorships, so they want as many people to listen as possible, I guess, to get as many people. And then if you get really into a show, you might want to go back. Because certain shows like The Daily are not like daily news recaps, like it just happens to release daily. But something like the Ezra Klein show, I guess these shows aren't super time specific. Like Ezra Klein might be talking to someone because of something going on at the time, but usually the conversations are just so interesting that you could just go back 3 years later and listen to it. Viviana also writes, "Do you think this will affect any university database access for students? Like, because it's now behind a paywall, be something that colleges actively want to give their students to use?" That's a really good question. I would imagine yes, because again, at least the way it's going to be for now, if you already have a Times subscription, you'll be able to access all this stuff. So, and I imagine most universities already have that, or something like that. So, they would provide a subscription to the written New York Times before the podcast. So theoretically, if they're already investing in a subscription for the written journalism, then I'm sure they would provide that for the audio. Viviana also writes, like making audio journalism use more desirable in academics. Yeah, again, and this is a great kind of little bookend here, because podcasting, again, is not just grown commercially, but again, Ezra Klein is not just a writer. I mean, he started as a blogger. He's, I believe, one of the co-founders of Vox. left to go work at the New York Times. But some would argue, some have argued already, Ezra Klein is one of the major, not the reason, but a non-insignificant reason Joe Biden dropped out of the race. Because he was one of the few people, kind of part of the establishment, kind of Democrat, who I think it was like in the spring, like March or April or May, he wrote an op-ed basically saying like Biden should drop out, that this is not going to work. And he got a lot of flack for it. And ultimately he was vindicated, right? So there's this sense that podcasting is not just becoming commercially important, but there's some really important journalistic work going on here. So I think as that continues to be reinforced, you're going to see a lot more podcasts be part of academic use. That you're going to start seeing people quoting podcasts in like doctoral papers, right? Like, because again, ultimately it's going to be it's just another platform, right? Every medium is always kind of infantilized until the people that grew up with it are now adults. And now it becomes a legitimate source of news and information. Keza also wrote, he really did speak up. I was surprised he started the domino effect, essentially. 100%. It was very slow at first, but it was kind of exponential. And again, his main kind of arguments were the Democratic Party, we've consolidated around Joe Biden. This is not going to work electorally. And I think his whole thesis was like, I think he is up to the task of being president. I just don't think he's up to the task of campaigning. So again, this is a podcaster, essentially a blogger turned podcaster, is having this huge influence, right? In case of 21 also writes, then the Pod Save guys jumped behind him, which was even more surprising. Yeah, the Pod Save guys, interesting group. But again, he really did start this domino effect. That's a great point. That Pod Save America being basically a political podcast hosted by essentially a bunch of like ex-Obama staffers, right? And eventually, yeah, it's once Pod Save America is saying this stuff, that's when it's really really kind of crossed a certain threshold of no going back. And Viviana, also, thank you very much for bringing this up. Remember, you did a story about George Clooney's op-ed. Yes, so I did do a story about George Clooney's op-ed about Joe Biden, right? So, but notably, he's a huge star. You expect him to have some kind of influence, right? And that was also hugely influential. So, but Ezra Klein started the process, right? So you don't get to George Clooney doing that, I think, without Ezra Klein kind of being one of the first people to go, the emperor has no clothes. So podcasting is really becoming important. And it'll be interesting to see if people pay for this. Okay, let me grab a quick drink here. Okay. Let's talk about story number 3. So, James Cameron, pictured here, has joined the board of directors of Stability AI, which is like an AI startup company. So, I have a quote here from Cameron saying, these flowery press releases that all the articles carry, and they really don't mean anything. But I'll read it just for a record's sake. So Cameron says, quote, I spent my career seeking out emerging technologies that push the very boundaries of what's possible, all in the service of telling incredible stories. I was at the forefront of CGI over 3 decades ago, and I've stayed on the cutting edge since. Now the intersection of generative AI and CGI image creation is the next wave. The convergence of these two totally different engines of creation will unlock new ways for artists to tell stories in ways we could have never imagined. Stability AI is poised to lead this transformation. I'm delighted to collaborate with the Stability AI team as they shape the future of all visual media, end quote. So that was very, very dramatic. I also got a quote here from Stability AI CEO Prem, I'm going to butcher this, I'm sorry, Akkaraju? Prem Akkaraju, I think, yeah. He's here saying, quote, James Cameron lives in the future and waits for the rest of us to catch up. Stability AI's mission is to transform visual media for the next century by giving creators a full-stack AI pipeline to bring their ideas to life. We have an unmatched advantage to achieve this goal with a technological and creative visionary like James at the highest levels of our company. This is not only a monumental statement for Stability AI, but the AI industry overall. The next frontier in visual media will be forged by a true fusion of artist and technology." End quote. Notably, Akuraju is the former CEO of Weta, which is a visual effects studio, I think Australia or New Zealand, who worked on a bunch of movies, including Cameron's Avatar movie. So that's like the genesis of this relationship. So a little bit more about Stability AI. So again, like I said, it's an AI startup founded in 2019. It's best known for its product Stable Diffusion, which is a text-to-image model. So for those of you who don't know a lot about AI or generative AI, it's something like ChatGPT is what's called a large language model, or an LLM. So, you put a prompt in and it spits back words, right? A text-to-image model is like when you say, make a picture of, James Cameron with a foot coming out of his nose, right? And then you do the prompt, and then it creates this image in mere minutes or seconds, right? The company has raised about $223 million in 5 rounds of fundraising, and the company says that it's valued somewhere around $1 billion. They recently launched Stable Audio, which is, similar to Stable Diffusion, but for music and sound generation. So saying like, create a plucky 10-second background track or something, right? And it'll just make something. And they, of course, are working on a text-to-video model. And of course, Hollywood, particularly the CEOs of these companies who want to, save time and money any way possible, they are very interested in this emerging technology when it comes, again, specifically these text-to-video models. And Cameron's comments shouldn't come as a huge surprise, but a little bit of surprise. And we'll talk about that in a second. But, again, Cameron is known for being an innovator. His films have always pushed the boundaries of technology, sometimes at the expense of the story and the characters, but famously his Terminator films, especially the second one was really was a big showcase for emerging CGI technology. Of course, Titanic had a lot of VFX work in it, and then of course Avatar was like this huge culmination of this interest in pushing the technology. But he's not just interested in this for film technology. He's also just really into science and tech generally. So he's like really into the Titanic stuff. Like he helped with dives to the initial dives down to the Titanic wreckage. And he also co-designed and co-engineered the submersible that dove to Challenger Deep, which is the lowest known point of the Earth's surface in the ocean. I think it's like off of the coast of Japan, I think, or Southeast Asia. So the dude's smart. So the dude's always been into tech, right? Viviana put in the comments, does this mean we don't have to wait another decade for the next Avatar? Yeah, I would be shocked if he's going to use this, because for Cameron, he's so particular with the VFX. That's why these movies take so long, and that's why they look so great, is because they put so much time and effort into every shot. Whereas AI is still far off. The whole idea of AI, the text-to-video models, is not that it's going to look good. The idea is that it's going to be able to do it really fast without having to pay a VFX artist to do it, right? And that's where the concern comes, right? So people are calling Cameron out for hypocrisy. Because famously, he made the Terminator 1 and 2, right? Which is about an apocalyptic future where humans, in their hubris, create a technology that can and will ultimately supplant its creator, us humans, right? And Deadline notes that he's talked about this explicitly over as recent as last year, talking about AI, saying, quote, "I warned you guys in 1984 and you didn't listen," end quote. But to be fair though, these comments, or rather any anxieties he has about artificial intelligence, are a lot more geared towards the military's use of it, right? This idea of it, basically having AI robots fighting wars, then conflicts escalate so quickly that humans have no time to enter into the process and de-escalate. He's a lot more concerned with that than using it in the creative process. But again, this is kind of almost like this hypocrisy. Like, he made 2 seminal movies about technology advancing to a point where we can't control it, and now he's helping usher in such technology into our lives, right? And of course, this is just one tiny piece of this puzzle, of this swirling conversation that really started in earnest, I would say late 2022, when ChatGPT really blew up in I want to say it went viral, but like really started to be used more widespread. This debate around it's a very controversial technology, generative AI. Critics of the technology see it as a threat, right? Not like it's going to bring down the downfall of society the way it's used in like military or like other capacities, but more so just that, it removes the human element from the creative process. And not only will it make the art worse, but it could actually end up taking the jobs of actual human beings, right? Which is a valid concern. Because again, Hollywood studios are interested in this because again, it could save time and money to just put in a prompt for a VFX shot rather than paying a person or a team of people to do it. On the flip side, advocates of the technology see it as a huge innovation, right? This idea that it makes art more accessible to non-artists, this idea that it allows them to quote-unquote participate in the process, and again, it cuts down on the time and money needed to accomplish certain things. I'm somewhere in the middle. So if you're hoping for me to have a big hot take about this, I'm somewhere in the middle. I think it is a neutral tool that can be used creatively and ethically and effectively, right? It's like CGI or any technology, right? Like CGI, it's gonna be overused out of laziness, but it can be used really well, right? So if you think about so many movies using computer-generated imagery nowadays, I sound so old, nowadays, it looks like shit. If anything, it looks worse than it maybe did 10 or 15 years ago, and it's because they're not putting a lot of money or time into it. They're really kind of just doing it fast and loose, right? But then you have like the Avatar movies where it's, they put so much effort and detail and time into each shot. So it looks incredible. And that's what AI is going to be. It's going to be something that is going to be overused, specifically out of laziness. But that doesn't mean it can't be used well. I'll just tell you, I use it all the time for stuff, to automate rote processes. So for example, if you're watching this video, because right now this is a live stream, but if you're watching this after the fact, as like its own separate video, this title was AI generated. The description is AI generated. Because why would I waste time with that? That's not art. That's dumb SEO advertising things to help game the algorithm. Why would I waste a precious moment of my time that can be used to developing these stories where I do actually write them, actually go through all the articles and write my own thoughts about them? Why would I take time away from that to come up with a good SEO description for this video? It's silly, right? So, ultimately, this is a technology that's coming no matter what. You cannot put the genie back in the bottle. Never in the history of civilization has any transformative technology like this ever been rolled back. And it's like, imagine trying to stop the industrialization of furniture manufacturing, right? Because for thousands of years, if you wanted a table, a guy had to make a table, per request, right? And it would be like in the 1880s saying like, oh, we shouldn't make tables in factories because you lose the craftsman's touch. You're right, you do lose the craftsman's touch. But like with art, most people don't care. They just want the table. Again, I think all of the concerns around this are valid, especially the worker displacement part. But this idea, ultimately, until we overthrow the capitalist regime, ultimately the laws of supply and demand are going to be in effect in the profit motive. And ultimately, if you can develop a technology to do this stuff faster and cheaper, most people don't care. That's more of a condemnation on society, but it's just a fact. Most people don't care if a certain VFX shot was done with effort and care, or if it was done with AI. They just don't care. And so we have two options. Do we just try to, in a futile manner, put the genie back in the bottle? Or do we do like what Cameron did with CGI? Instead of avoiding CGI in the late 80s, early 90s, he embraced it and found ways to make it the best it could be so that it was not only a worthy substitute or a worthy companion to practical effects, but also perhaps in some areas a replacement, right? So those are the two options that we have. And I don't know. It's very. What's exciting and scary is that the technology is developing so quickly that I think it's developing faster than we have time to figure out what's the best way to use it. And, you know, some people think Cameron's a hypocrite. Maybe he is. But it's this technology is coming no matter what. And it's going to be how we respond to it that is gonna make it the difference. Okay, let me grab a quick drink here. Okay. Let's talk about story number 4. So SAG-AFTRA, of course, the Screen Actors Guild and Alliance of Film, Television, and Radio Actors, I think, right? The Actors Union is moving forward to try to bring intimacy coordinators into their fold, under their kind of union jurisdiction. So they filed a petition with the National Labor Relations Board, and they, called this, quote, a natural evolution of the union's commitment to help build a stable and safe future for our members, end quote. I also have a more extended quote here from SAG-AFTRA President Fran Drescher, aka the nanny, if you can believe it, saying, quote, maybe I should do this quote in the nanny voice. Working in no, I'm not going to. Working in scenes involving nudity or physical intimacy is some of the most vulnerable work an actor can do. Intimacy coordinators not only provide assistance in navigating these scenes, but they also create a safety net for performers, ensuring consent and protection throughout the entire process. Shifting the power imbalance that has been ingrained over a century is challenging but important work. Work that can be done even more effectively with the backing of a union. Intimacy coordinators have our backs on set, and now it's our turn to have theirs, end quote. So you might be hearing me say this, you might have no idea what I'm even talking about. What is an intimacy coordinator? So it is a position for film production. It's also used on stage as well for theatrical productions, but it's a role that emerged following Hollywood's reckoning with sexual harassment and violence in the industry, right? Because before the Me Too era, there were no protocols for filming sex scenes, or at least standardized protocols, right? How much practice should there be? Who should be on set during the filming? And ultimately, actors were put into uncomfortable and compromising positions all the time. It just became standard. Not because people were trying to be evil, but they just weren't thinking. They just weren't being considerate of the actor in the vulnerable position that they were going to be in performing this scene. After Me Too, you couldn't play fast and loose with these things anymore. Even if it wasn't really it wasn't motivated for the right reasons, it was more out of self-preservation. No one wanted to be the next Harvey Weinstein or get canceled. So, it almost, and I did a video about this, how Hollywood films have become more sexless over the past 10 or 15 years. So in a lot of ways, we went the other extreme, where it's like, okay, instead of figuring out a healthy way to go about doing these scenes, we're just going to not do any of them, right? So the idea of the intimacy coordinator is it helps provide a happy middle ground. So what they do is they choreograph scenes or work with the actors on scenes involving intimacy or nudity. Even if it's as simple as just working with the actors to establish some ground rules, right? Where should I touch you? What's fair game? What are we going to say is not allowed for the scene, right? Just literally having a conversation about it can just do wonders, right? And Deadline notes that many studios already demand, a lot of studios have already mandated that if you're going to have a scene like this, you need to have an intimacy coordinator, which is good, but again, it's not standardized. And it's really interesting because a lot of people are not quite against it, but just don't feel compelled to do it. And I'm going to tell a little personal story. I actually got in trouble for this. So I'm not going to give any specifics because I don't want to, call anyone specifically out. But if you know, you know. So I used to work at a nonprofit, and I was their video production manager. And one of my first week there, I was working through their videos because they make these videos about public health related topics, and they worked with an outside video vendor, and I was kind of the in-between person. And there was a video that we were going to make that was a remake of an older video, which involved some pretty nothing nude or sexually explicit, but very intense kissing and touching. So I suggested that maybe it'd be worth exploring the idea of bringing on an intimacy coordinator, just because again, it's there's two actors are touching each other. It doesn't have to be sexual. Just two actors are touching each other, let alone getting all up in each other's business. So we asked the vendor about it, and the vendor was run by this older actress. Maybe she was in her 40s or 50s, and she shot it down immediately. And she was like, you don't need to worry about that. which is interesting because she's a woman, right? So even women can be complicit in a system. She didn't say this, but it was almost like this vibe of like, this older generation of, it just comes with the territory, right? Like I suffered, like, that's just the way it is. So when they shot it down, I brought up, I explained why it would be valuable, and basically by that point, it was essentially an industry standard. So I was kind of really trying to pitch it as like, not only would this be good in a vacuum, but like this is not some fringe thing. Like this is becoming a normal part on film sets. And there was a lot of drama at this company, and I ended up getting laid off eventually. And this was brought up as one of the things that how dare I, what's the word? Kind of contradict or challenge the video vendor because they know more. But again, and I think in the years since this happened, I've been proven more right every single day. Because again, why would people be against this? It's not that people are actively against this. They just don't think it's necessary. Especially a lot of producers might be against it just because it's an extra crew member, right? So that's extra cost, extra salary, you need more food on set, all this stuff. But again, it's really dumb because we already have a similar position for films. It's called a fight choreographer, right? Fight scenes. Why do you have a fight choreographer? You have a fight choreographer to ensure no one gets hurt, right? If you take any of the language of people explaining why intimacy coordinators are unnecessary, and you replace intimacy with fight choreographer, it sounds ridiculous. Like imagine saying, we don't really need a fight choreographer. We're just gonna let them go at it because that's more authentic. Are you insane? You could never do that, right? Because obviously you're not throwing punches in an intimate scene, but someone might have a trigger, right, that you don't know about. They don't want to be. They might be themselves a victim of sexual assault or harassment or violence, even. So maybe touching them in a certain spot might be a trigger, and they know that, right? So if you have these conversations outlining, where you're gonna be touched. If you do want to have it a little more free form, again, you can kind of create some red lines figuratively. So, it's like, don't touch me here, but you can squeeze this and poke that and all, right? But, it would be insane if we treated fight choreography the same way we try to treat intimacy choreography, right? Viviana commented here, I think this is great because acting is such an open workspace, so it often doesn't follow the same HR standards, but it is still a workplace. People should feel comfortable doing their job. 100%. And that's what people forget. Celebrity, even if you're not a celebrity, but celebrities too, like, this is a job. This is a workplace. So in so many HR best practices and standards are kind of thrown out the window because it's like, well, we're making art and we're doing this and you kind of have to follow different rules. And that's maybe true to a point, but no one should feel unsafe or uncomfortable at work. That's just full stop. SAG has been rolling out guidelines and protocols and qualifications for this role. Even though they're not officially part of the union, they have been putting out, I guess, like I said, like these guidelines, kind of like how it should be done. And the 2023 contract that SAG won with the studios last year included a provision that allows actors to ask for an intimacy coordinator if they feel one is warranted. And the studio must consider the request in good faith and not retaliate. The actor can't get in trouble for asking for one. And so official inclusion in the union would allow greater clarity and control over the process to ensure the actor's safety. Something that's come up is, the Deadline notes that there was a kind of a quote-unquote controversy. I don't know if controversy is the right word, but kind of an issue where you had the intimacy coordinator for the film Miller's Girl, which came out last year, publicly speaking about the process of being the intimacy coordinator on that film, talking about, publicly speaking about this process that theoretically should have been confidential. She wasn't saying anything super, I don't know if it was he or she, but anyway, the intimacy coordinator wasn't saying anything super sensitive, but you really shouldn't be talking about it at all. I think the idea is. So if they were part of the union, then there would be a lot more kind of guardrails around something like that. And I got a quote here from SAG-AFTRA National Executive Director and Chief Negotiator, Duncan Crabtree, Ireland. That must be have to be a really big business card or a really small font. I have a quote from him here saying, quote, "Intimacy coordinators are important partners to our members when they are working on some of the most vulnerable scenes possible. As part of our union, they'll have the strength of our 160,000 members standing behind them when they sit down to negotiate a deal that will bolster the foundation of this role, create job opportunities, safely expand and ensure diversification of the talent pool, and improve safety on set," end quote. And that's another thing is, inclusion into the union would allow intimacy coordinators to collectively bargain with studios. Because right now they're kind of just all like these little, it's kind of a one-to-one thing. And I got a quote here from Marcy Leroff, who's an intimacy coordinator, saying, quote, "We have no protections, and we have no health insurance, we have no pension," end quote. So, I'm always, anyone who's followed the show, I'm very pro-union, so I feel like every worker should be in a union, no matter how small or mundane. It's not about protecting you from physical safety or physical danger. Workers should just have the right to be able to collectively bargain with their employers. So I think this is a great move, if nothing else, because it reinforces the need and the standardness, the normalcy surrounding the role in Hollywood and the industry. Okay, let me grab a quick drink here. Okay. Let's talk about story number 5. So, Margot Robbie and Jacob Elordi have been cast in Emerald Fennell's Wuthering Heights adaptation. That whole sentence felt like a Mad Libs exercise. So, it's going to be Emerald Fennell's upcoming adaptation of the iconic novel, and they're going to be playing Catherine and Heathcliff, respectively. So they already have a connection with Fennell. Robbie has produced both of Fennell's films, and Elordi was in Fennell's last film, right? So this is kind of bringing some of the band back together in a sense. So if you don't know about this story, so Wuthering Heights is an 1847 novel by Emily Bronte, her only novel. She's the sister of, I forget her name, but the author of Jane Eyre. So a lot of imagine being parents and two of your daughters are produce some of the most celebrated literary works in the English language, right? 2 of them, you got 2. I think there was a third sister. I wonder if she did anything. So here's like a little bit of a description of the novel from Wikipedia. Wikipedia says that it, quote, "concerns 2 families of the landed gentry living on the West Yorkshire moors, the Earnshaws and the Lintons, and their turbulent relationships with the Earnshaws' foster son, Heathcliff," who's, end quote, who's going to be played by Elordi. The novel is influenced by Romanticism and Gothic fiction. It's considered one of the greatest English language novels ever written, and it was controversial at the time for its content. So it depicted domestic abuse, both physical and emotional, as well as challenged Victorian morality and religion and the class system. So it's really cool to kind of see some of these critiques being made in the novel. But it's like a almost 200-year-old novel at this point. And there have been several film adaptations. I mean, the most famous is William Wyler's 1939 version, starring Laurence Olivier and Merle Oberon. Fun fact about Merle Oberon is she is the first actress of Asian descent to win an Academy Award. But she was not. She hid the fact that her father was Asian, because she's biracial, so she can kind of pass as white. So when Michelle Yeoh was gonna win, people were saying, "Oh, she's the first Asian woman," and everyone was like, technically Merle Oberon was, but because the industry was so racist, she had to pretend she was just full white. So a little bit of background about Emerald Fennell. So I don't know if controversial is the right word, but polarizing, right? So she's an English actress and writer and filmmaker, and she has written and directed 2 major films, Promising Young Woman, and then last year, Saltburn. And again, these are very polarizing films, especially the latter. And she's been criticized for being kind of like a faux intellectual. Her work, the work thinking it's smarter than it is. Saltburn, I think, is a little pleased with itself and kind of thinks it's like this really inspired artistic expression, and I think it's kind of just silly and dumb. But So she already kind of has this reputation. And she's actually spoken about Wuthering Heights in the past as being a source of inspiration for partially for Saltburn. I guess this idea of like the British upper class, right? And we have a quote from her here saying, quote, "There's a scene in Wuthering Heights after Kathy dies, spoiler alert, when Heathcliff digs down to her coffin and tries to get to her. It's very clear what he's intending to do, which is to, at the very least, touch her, kiss her. So it's part of the Gothic tradition that sex and death are kind of intertwined," end quote. And of course, if you've seen Saltburn, you see the parallels with a little scene in that movie where Barry Keoghan, to put it cleanly, pleasures himself on the grave of Jacob Elordi's character, right? So there's a little bit of a connection there. And when the idea of her adapting this novel, people were already a little concerned because, people were wondering if she would be able to handle such a complex and nuanced story with the attention that it cares for, right? This is not a love story in a sense. It's a very psychologically complex and complicated set of characters. And her films, again, a lot of people have complained of being kind of shallow. And I keep saying some people, I'm saying it. At least I haven't seen Promising Young Woman, but Saltburn I felt very shallow. Like it kind of felt like Baby's first critique of class, right? And so people are already concerned about that. And then there's also this added element, specifically with Elordi's casting, because something that most of the films have not captured, except for one 2011 adaptation, Heathcliff is meant to be descended from the Romani people. Who are typically have darker hair, dark eyes, and dark skin. And that's how he's described in the book, having dark hair, dark eyes, and dark skin. Almost to the point of being black or African. And apart from this 2011 adaptation that actually cast a black actor, usually he is cast as just like a white guy. Even though in the script they do mention that he's like darker, even though like Laurence Olivier is not any darker than anyone else in the movie, right? And I have a quote here from someone on Twitter, and DeLoreans, who said, quote, Heathcliff is described as a dark-skinned brown man in the book, and a major plot point is that he was subjected to racist abuse by his adopted family. But yeah, sure, Jacob Elordi is perfect, end quote. Obviously a little bit of sarcasm there, right? Because, and this is the second time this year that we've gotten a casting announcement about a traditionally Romani character being cast with a white guy. Because we have Robert Downey Jr. playing Victor Von Doom, aka Dr. Doom, in the upcoming Avengers movie, right? So a lot of people are, if not upset, just at least disappointed at this, the whitewashing, again, of one of English literature's few prominent people of color, right? Because ultimately, not, because marginalized communities were gate-kept out for so long, that we're only now getting, ultimately, if you were to make like a list of like the greatest English language novels, a small percentage of them are going to be about marginalized communities. It's not because books about not marginalized communities are worse. It's just that we haven't had enough time to write more of those stories, right? So we have this character who's part of the definitive English canon, literary canon, undisputed, this character, and you're just going to cast a white guy, right? And again, it raises the questions about Fennell's maturity to handle material, right? And again, the character's been whitewashed in the past, but of course it was in 1939, because what else? Well, obviously was not going to be played by a dark-skinned actor or a black actor. But it's not 1939, it's 2024 or 2025 or 6 by the time this comes out. So, I think she should do better. And then furthermore, I just feel like Robbie and Elordi are just not good picks for those characters. And also there's like a huge age gap between the two of them, and I'm not sure if there's meant to be an age gap in the novel. So I'll reserve my judgment on that respect, but I just feel like this isn't really good. I mean, I like both of these actors, but it just seems like they got them because they're big stars, not because like who would be the best to play these characters. Okay, so that basically wraps up the show. Thank you all for watching. Just going to give a few quick plugs here. This isn't my only YouTube channel. I also have a sister channel called Peter Squared, where I cover topics related to film, media, and entertainment in a more scripted video essay format. The video I have up now is called A Closer Look at Frozen, where, you guessed it, I take a closer look at the Disney film Frozen, taking a look at what went right, what went wrong, everything in between, using these two cartoon versions of like the older and younger version of myself. It would really be a huge help if you go check out that video, leave a comment, let me know why you think I'm 100% wrong about everything I'm saying, like the video, subscribe. It really would help that channel grow. You can find the video in the description down below. And I also want to give a plug to the podcast, like I mentioned before, that I do with my fiancée Viviana, called Now That's Why I Call It Franchise, where we pick a film franchise and we go through every single installment, the good, the bad, and the ugly. We're currently doing Star Wars, which is a lot of fun. This upcoming Friday, we're doing releasing our Revenge of the Sith episode, which I'm super, super excited for. One of the best episodes I think we've ever recorded. Definitely go check it out. You can find us wherever you get your podcast. There will be no paywall for our podcast, that's for sure. You can also find us on YouTube if that's your preferred way to podcast. You can also just find us in the link in the description down below. And then finally, want to give a quick plug to Cinema and Cuso. It's not just a YouTube channel. It started as and still is a Substack newsletter where hold on. I'm sorry. I was fixing a tech thing. I'm sorry. It's not just a YouTube channel. It started as and still is a Substack newsletter where I publish written reviews for new movies coming out. I have reviews for My Old Ass and Transformers 1 coming out tomorrow. So you can go check that out. You can go to go to the description down below and click on the link to find it. You can also just go to your browser, type in cinemaandcuso.substack.com. That's it for this week. Thank you all so much for watching. If you haven't already, please like this video. It really, really, really helps with the algorithm, with people finding the channel. And if you haven't already, subscribe. What are you doing here not subscribing? You're not gonna see any more of the videos. You're gonna forget about this amazing experience you had. So please subscribe. It really would help with growing the community. But that's it for this week. Thank you all. Until next time, peace out.